first time I went in the black room was only 11 days. And it was just enough to know that I had to go further. The next time I went in was the 98 days, 3 months. And then I really was burning to go a little bit deeper and deeper. But really, in that time, I wouldn't say there was any visions as such. There was just an intensity and trying to get the inner experience of silence and trying to chant and be alone and just be absorbed in God, in silence. And even in the long stretch, when I was in the third time, I was in for the 13 months in the black room, there really wasn't visions then. There were perceptions, insights. I might have had some dreams and things, but really you're trying to experience your silence more vividly and real than your waking dream or your sleeping dream, and you're trying to keep your aliveness and awakeness constant and your memory of God constant during the whole time you're in the room, through 24 hours every day. So anytime you fell off that, you were trying to pull yourself back. It was very disciplined like that. And then there were rituals of the day where you'd get up, you'd have some tea, maybe tea would be sent in, then you have 3 or 4 hours and some food would come in, you'd have 3 or 4 hours and maybe tea would come in again, then another 3 or 4 hours, and then there'd be a supper, and then 3 or 4 hours later there might have been a hot milk or a hot tea, and that was it during the day. But those were enough to cause some disturbances, some functions that you had to take care of each day that broke up the day a little bit. But I'd come out after the 13 months, and then I tried to travel around India, and I just went to travel a few places, and I ran into a number of different mystics and different saints, different experiences. But it's funny, because after you spend that much time alone, you're very naive, like you're very internalized. So I couldn't understand why I wasn't just getting back to North America at the time. I just half expected to be there, but I didn't know why it wasn't happening. So, and then some struggles came up with some people and things, and I went back into the room for the 4th time. And in this 4th time, things changed a lot. So up till then, during the 3 months in the black room, during the 13 months in the black room, there weren't really visions. It was just an intensity, just being alone and going through the changes that you do when you're alone, coming to terms with your feelings, your thoughts, your emotions. When I went back into this room this last time, it was a bit of a puzzle with me. Something hadn't been resolved. So I didn't understand it, so I went back into the room again. And this time, I'd been out for about a month after the 13 months. And when I went back in this time, it was as if I was out long enough to almost forget about being inside, and just the outside was a little bit more alive and real. It was about a moon cycle. Then when I went back into the room, it's like this gong went off. Boom. And suddenly, as soon as I walked into the door of the room, the very first minute, and the door got shut behind me, it's as if I was back in the room like it had been 13. I'd been sitting there 13 months. It was just the same energy was right there, and inner presence was there. So it stood out as a real contrast to the outer world consciousness that I'd been traveling around with and looking around with for the last month. And it reminded me, it was like a contrast reminding me, whoa, there's something you can't measure that was also going on. So I went back into the room. I just started my regular routine of chanting and meditating and chanting. The main idea was to be chanting all the time, but there was an unsettledness in me, like there was a puzzle I went in with trying to find out, how come some things weren't happening the way I expected. So one day in the middle of this, probably about 3 or 4 weeks or a week or so into this 4th time in the room, it suddenly started to storm, and it was storming harder and raining harder than any time in the whole 13 months or any other time I'd previously been in this room. It had never rained so hard, and it just felt like the rain was falling, like each drop of rain was like a golf ball falling. It was just so boom. It was just very heavy energy, and there was a lot of tension in the storm. I could feel the rain, I could feel the tension, and I felt that the tension in the storm was my tension. It was just my tension. So I'm sitting down meditating. I mean, it's really boom, 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 boom. It's just storming outside. And there's, I can't see, I'm just sitting in this room meditating and feeling the storm outside, really, listening to it, feeling it. But I really wasn't out there listening to it. I was feeling how it was paralleling my own tension. So I'm sitting there just meditating, and then it's like I heard it started, all the rumbling and the thundering was coming. It was really this dangerous thundering. So I kind of look up. I'm sitting in a black room. I'm sitting there. I'm meditating. So to say I'm looking up, it's not like I'm looking with my eyes, but I kind of looked up at this. And when I looked up, I could see these storm clouds. I saw these clouds rumbling together, like just boom, boom. I could hear it, I could feel it, then I could see it. And when I saw it, then I saw as the clouds rumbled together, it just started sparking. All of a sudden there's this lightning blast, and this huge lightning bolt came out of the storm. And it just, I'm sitting there meditating, and I felt that the lightning bolt hit the room. And I'm sitting there shaking, but I'm meditating. I'm in my inner spirit, but I'm like trembling, thinking the room just got hit. And I'm sitting there, I'm waiting, thinking I died. I'm just sitting there and expecting, I don't know what. I'm sitting there, and then so I'm waiting, and after, I don't know, a second or two, I'm wondering, well, maybe the wall got down, maybe the lightning just hit me, you know? And so I'm thinking like this, I'm just wondering about this, and I'm feeling this. And so at this stage, it's in my meditation, I'm sitting there, but it's where my consciousness is. I'm seeing it, I'm sitting there, but I feel the walls broken down, and I'm feeling I've been hit. So I'm sitting there, okay, well, I'm waiting. So I feel I've been hit by the lightning bolt, and I'm sitting waiting. And as I'm just sitting there, like, I can't see really waiting, just alive in the moment, anticipating, my mind came in and started wondering, well, what if it hit me and I'm just absorbing it? And it was just the thought that came up in my mind. I don't know why I thought, what if I absorbed it? But as I began to wonder if I absorbed it, it's as if it happened. So I began to feel like I was absorbing it. So my feelings began to go out and feel this light. Like I already felt the wall had broke down, hit me. And so if I'm absorbing it, who's absorbing it? Where's it going? What's happening? So I kept following this until I just kept absorbing things, sensing this absorption until it just spaced out so much that there was no me. Just to nothingness. And how long I was there, I don't know. I was there for, it could have been hours, it could have been days. I really don't know how long I was out of my body or in that consciousness where there was no me. Okay, at some point, I began to sense something. It's not like it's me. It's just like I began to just sense something, just like a point of being in nothingness, just a sense floating there. Not even floating, just being. Then it began to go through another process. I began to sense a bit more. Then almost at some point I began to feel I'm out in the universe somewhere and I'm floating. Or then it became I was floating, or just floating, drifting. And then I began to feel that I'm almost flying or I'm falling. And as I began to sort of sense this sense of movement, it was like I was just on the edge of a galaxy or a universe or something, and sensing movement or some kind of thing. But it wasn't me that was moving, just it was a process of movement coming on, and my consciousness was out there. And then I began to sense almost more like I'm falling or flying, or in little stages, dawnings of movement. Then I began to feel, as I started to move, I started to see a star or two. I think it was a star or two. But as I started to fall, it was like I was falling, but I didn't fall into stars. All of a sudden, these stars, and when it was falling, it turned into like a mandala of color. And it's like I fell into this star, into this. It became like this kaleidoscope of colors flying by, sounds, images. Things were just floating by, like I was floating in some kind of fantasy land. But they were all very alive, meaningful symbols that I felt really connected to at the time. So I just drifted through that. I remember in drifting through it, seeing color, associate color thing, just experiencing colors, sounds. And I remember seeing symbols floating by, or signs, symbols, I Ching, hexagrams, colors, things like that. Just all this. It's like I came up to this mandala and I fell into the mandala, and I came into the mandala, and then I became part of the mandala, and the inside of it was almost like. So this happened on a, I don't know how to call it, I guess you call it a mental or imaginary plane or an imaginative plane, but it was the only thing in my consciousness at the time. That's where I was, or my sense of where I was. So then I began to feel I was floating and drifting in space again, but this time I really had a sense of as if I was on the outside edge of a galaxy, spiraling and just drifting, but with a bit of a twist, like I'm just twisting into something. Then somewhere along this line I began to see I'm going towards this star. I'm going towards another star, but towards this star. And I started to drift towards the star. And then I started falling more and more and going through, like spinning and spiraling and coming more to the star. And as I got closer to the star, somehow I began to realize, I don't know if I realized it was the sun, I just realized it was a star, sense it was a star. But I also began to sense there were these planets around the star. And in a very funny way, I was just sensing I wasn't going to planet 1 or planet 2. I was going to the third planet. And then I began to see this relationship between how second and the third wouldn't get along, but the second and the fourth and the third and the sixth, and how very musical or mathematical, there was a sense of rhythms or harmonies. But it was just in a moment, I just sort of sensed this. As I was going towards the sun, I sensed this politics of the solar system, let's call it, or just structure or law or mathematics. But then as I'm approaching it more, I began to feel a really more distinct sense of I, that I was doing some traveling, or I was in some kind of body traveling, but it was very tiny. It's like as if I was traveling at the speed of thought, or I was a thought that was traveling. And then I remember as I'm starting to come into the solar system or towards the star, there were these huge giant beings. And I sensed that they were the planets, or the gods, or the spirits of the planets. And I felt I was just, as I was falling to the sun or to the third planet, I wasn't going right to the sun, I was going to the third planet. I was going between the legs of these big, huge gods. And I was thinking, at the time, they seemed to be all looking out for something, looking out into the universe for something. And I felt I was so tiny they weren't even seeing me. It was just a thought coming through, and I was going through their legs. They didn't even see me. And at the time, I was kind of thought it was humorous. I just kind of was, that's funny. They're looking out. They only see me. I'm coming through. However, so I went through the legs of some of these planets, or past some of these giant beings. Then I began to realize I'm coming down to the third planet. And just as I'm coming down to the third planet, I didn't see a huge being or anything like that on the planet I was coming to, but then it's like falling into a texture more. But strange thing, once I was just about to come down to the planet, and then everything got spinning and got kind of, I don't know if I call it dizzy or confused or distorted or something, but suddenly it's like you're flying above water and suddenly you're swimming underneath water. It was like this texture changed on another level. And I'm not sure how much I understood it then or it's come to me since, but I think what happened is I came inside the moon sphere. And suddenly I wasn't seeing things. I wasn't in the same light. It's like I'd come down into the earth, but to get to the earth I had to come through this moon sphere. And all of a sudden, everything I had experienced had to be interpreted according to my memories of what Earth was. So I was coming down to the planet, and I'm trying, and out of nothingness, out of no me or anything. And as I'm coming down to the planet, I'm coming back into this room. But as I'm just coming down to my consciousness back into my body almost, it's as if everything had to be interpreted, or I had to try and figure out everything according to the memories, according to my memory patterns that were inherent in me before I left my body. So, in a strange way, all my old childhood memories, my feelings, my thoughts, any kind of dogma or understanding I had about the earth suddenly came back in, and those were the tools that I had to begin to experience or understand my vision or what happened to me. So, at this point, then I began to realize as I'm coming down on the planet, and I'm coming back to the room really, but I began to sort of see some political structures and things, and injustice, or feel injustices around the world. Now, I'd have to say now that those feelings were what I understood of the world to be, but I really had this feeling of masses of people in China and having nothing, and everywhere else having more than enough, especially North America. And I had this sense of tremendous injustice, and that at some point there was going to be a balancing of humanity, of power, of balancing of things in the world. And that meant that the population would probably be equalized around the planet, or balanced around the planet. This was a feeling. By the time I came into my consciousness in my body, I felt that there was going to be this huge war, that there would be some kind of migration. So I'm sitting in this room, and I'm half back in my body, but I'm half in this altered state, worried and wondering about the conditions of humanity. There's much more complicated than this, but this is just what I can remember right now of this experience. But I began to wonder, how could all these poor people ever take over North America or other things, or just stuff like this? So then I had some really sort of what I would call really bizarre aspects to the vision. I'm sitting in the room, but I'm feeling where the world is. I'm sensing the sense of injustice or imbalance in the world. It's as ominous as the storm was when I started this process, but the ominousness just so what was just or not just in the world, and I felt there was this huge time of change coming.